Welcome back to Resource Stage Study Hall. I'm Carl.
And I'm Matthew.
Thanks for joining us again. We are today talking about audio mixers. And, you know, I was joking around earlier on saying that today is, we're getting close to the end of April 2023. And everything we talk about today will transfer into 2024, 2025, 2026, because the concepts that we're talking about with an analog audio console, they've been the same forever, and they will continue to be the same. We don't actually sell a whole lot of analog audio consoles anymore, though, do we?
No, everyone's usually looking at digital ones because they want one thing that will do everything.
Right. But there's a reason why we have these 4 different analog audio mixers in front of us today, and that is that this is kind of where it all starts. If you understand how these consoles work, then taking that concept and moving it into a digital audio console is actually pretty easy. And let's be honest, many of our school or our community theater clients, they can't afford to jump into a digital console at some of the price points. I mean, yes, they're a lot cheaper than they used to be, but you know, something like this is going to last you a long time. Mm-hmm. This mixer here that I've got in front of me, this is a Yamaha mixer that is probably 20 years old?
At least.
Something like that. And yet it still works. It's still functional. It's actually in for service from a high school right now. But the concepts from this one transfer exactly to this one, which is a new console we just put into our rental inventory here not that long ago. Same concepts from 20 years ago, from 30 years ago, and so on and so forth. It's all kind of the same.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's crazy how much of these mixers, it's the same fundamental principles. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today, is what all these knobs and faders on these mixers are and how they're not nearly as intimidating as they look.
Yeah.
We're going to break down things like all of this hurts, not 64 buttons or knobs, it's just 8.
Right. Yeah. So, first thing first, it's called a mixer. Why is it called a mixer, Matthew?
Because we want to mix the audio levels coming in. If we have Sally in grade 2, and she's really quiet, she's nervous to be on stage, and we have John who's in grade 9, and he's really loud, he's been doing musical theater for years, completely different volumes. So we want to mix those signals, so that way whatever's coming out is going to be a nice, clean, balanced output.
Right. And then we also have inputs like, let's say somebody's playing their guitar, or you're trying to capture the audio from the recorders or the ukuleles or the whatever it is that your class might be using. And then you have the elementary school principal comes walking up and picks up the microphone and it's really loud. And, you know, trying to deal with that. That is the whole purpose of the mixer. I've been thinking about this, and I think that I like to split a mixer into 2 different functionalities. Mm-hmm. At the base. I mean, yes, you could argue there's other things, but at the base of it, it comes down to 2 things.
Yeah, and that would be
volume
and routing.
Right, volume and routing. There we go. So let's start. Let's start maybe at the top. And you already said that it's really kind of, if you understand the one side, then it kind of works along the side. So if we start with channel number 1, well, go ahead, Matthew. Where's the best place to start?
Best place to start is right here. So that's going to be our input. So it's either usually for a mic or a instrument, which would be a line level, a 1/4 inch connector here, and that's going to be the input of our source. So going from there, that's just directly into the mixer. So we're going to jump from here all the way to the bottom now to the fader. So this is our direct control for volume, and we're controlling that signal level. So that way we know if it's going to be loud, quiet, and we can kind of keep that control.
Right. So that's our master for that channel, or that's our volume control for that channel.
Exactly.
And then we need a volume control for everything going out, right? So that would be over on the far right-hand side there.
Yeah, so it's really nice and easy to see where it's the big red fader on most consoles. You can even see on our older ones, they've got the big red fader. And on this one, almost always, it's just one large fader on them, colored red. It's usually something very different from the rest of the faders to show that.
Signify.
Signify.
That's the word you're looking for.
Yeah.
There we go. All right. So we have inputs at the top. We've got volume control. If we move up the console or up the channel strip, from the bottom. The next thing we see here is a mute button. And it's interesting because a couple of manufacturers out there call it an on button. So you have to actually engage that to get audio out, where most of the manufacturers in the industry use that as a mute button. When you press that button, it is going to mute it. It is going to essentially turn off any signal that is going through that channel. Now, if you do that, it means that you're able to leave the faders up at the levels that you're working with, and then you can hit the mute and it will stop the audio passing through. That's really handy because if you need to mute and unmute a channel, then that's, it's easy to do.
Yeah, it's perfect. So like Carl said, if we had the principal who came on and he's a lot louder, we can mute his microphone where we know it sounds good for him. And that way we can change that level for the next person on their fader and just mute and unmute. Or if someone's off stage and they're not talking anymore, they're coming back like that principal or an MC, you can just unmute their microphone and be right back at the level that they were before.
All right, great. So mute is right there. Then we have another button, and this button gets changed depending on the manufacturer. Different manufacturers, and even within the same lineup, you can see some different names, but they all pretty much do the same thing. Allen & Heath, the manufacturer of this console, has chosen to refer to this as a listen button on this console, but sometimes, or often, that's actually called a solo button, or sometimes it's called a PFL button, a pre-fade listen button. And the idea of that is that when you click on that button, then the audio from that channel is routed directly to the headphone output. So if I put a pair of headphones on and it's plugged into the headphone output, then I can click on that and I'm just going to hear that one channel. Now, I say I'm just going to hear the one channel, but I can actually select multiple channels where I'm listening to all of them at the same time. This can be really great if, let's say you are trying to figure out, why does the piano sound like that? Why that microphone on the piano, is it working properly? What's going on? I can click on that and I can listen to just the piano. Or let's say I might have a couple of microphones and I'm trying to pick up my choir and I'm trying to figure out what sounds weird. I can maybe select the listen button or the PFL solo button for 2 channels and listen to both of the microphones that are picking up the choir and listen to that and see kind of what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
That solo button is actually super, super handy.
Absolutely is. So up from the solo button, then we have sometimes we have things like record button. We're not going to go over that today.
Yeah, that's pretty specific to this console because it's got USB output and that kind of thing. It's a whole other thing.
Exactly. So the next one up here is our first knob of the day. So it's the pan knob. So this is going to control our audio if it's going to the left side or the right side if you have a stereo setup for your speakers. Now, sometimes, a lot of the times in schools, they're just mono because we don't want one side to get a different sound than the other. But sometimes it's actually used in listening and hearing assist systems,
right,
where they would have the hearing assist on the right and then the stage on the left. So rule of thumb is we always want to just keep that at center. If there's ever something going on, double check that pan knob and make sure that it's not panned to one side or the other.
Absolutely. So you may find yourself in a spot where you're using a mixer for recording of your choir or a group, and you think, oh, you know what? I'm going to pan this input a little bit to the right and a little bit to the left so that my recording's kind of cool and I can do some neat stuff there. Just be careful that you might be doing that for your recording, but now the people at the back of the room in the activity room or whatever other room, or maybe that hearing assist system, now they can't hear things the same way. Or maybe it's louder because you've turned it up on that side. So you want to be careful how you use that. Know your system. Know how your system is laid out. That's one that it's a good idea maybe before your show. Play some sound, play some music into the channel, turn that back and forth and see what that actually does. So
like Carl said about going to a different area for your sound, that brings us right into the next one here, which is our aux. So the auxiliary knob is usually an auxiliary send somewhere on the console, which on this one, I believe we've got it Oh, where are we here?
Right there.
There we are there.
Another great one, yep.
So it's going to control sending that audio to somewhere else. So if we have on-stage monitors for bands, they want to be able to hear themselves and the other members of the band, or somebody who has speakers in another area, like a green room or that, before they're presenting, we want to control what's being sent to that other area and not the rest of the show. So that way you're not getting people in the backstage hearing the same thing that's going on live.
Right. So that's now two different knobs that are adjusting your routing, right? So we said volume and routing. The pan is adjusting your routing to left and right, and how much volume is going to either side of that. And then the auxiliary, that knob there is adjusting how much is getting sent out to the auxiliary send, which again, as Matthew just said, monitors, recording, variety of different things that it could be depending on your application. So you want to consider, what is being sent out there. On this console, the next knob, which they've shown in yellow, is actually an effects send. Now, for a lot of our school clients, they have enough reverberation in the gymnasium, they don't need to get into effects. But this is something that's included in a lot of compact consoles like this, especially if you're doing a little bit of recording maybe in your music classroom, or maybe somebody's doing some recording in a basement or something like that. Having that effects send is good. And that essentially works like an aux, and it's sending a level out to the effects processor. So when that is going, then you can go out and go to, you can have that effects sort of reverb or whatever. Okay, so now we get to this chunk. We've got a chunk of EQ here and 4 different knobs. Do you want to take this one on?
Yeah, so it's really important to view this as a group. It's a group of knobs. They're all doing one thing, but technically in the same group. It's the same as someone on this one here.
Right.
We've got a low and a high. So this is the equalizer. These knobs control frequencies. So say someone sounds really, really screechy in the high end, or there's a really deep low growl going on. We could take something like this low, and it's what we're talking about, changing the volume of those low frequencies. It's like we were saying, it's routing and volume that we want to focus on. And in this one, we're changing the volume of the lower frequencies.
Right.
Now, when we get to this mixer, it was a lot smaller, where on this, we've got a lot more control, where we've got low frequencies, mid, and high, and then there's one other knob here. And what is that one, Carl?
Okay, so that knob is by far the most misunderstood knob on every audio console out there. It's interesting, we go into schools and churches, community theaters, lots in different places. You walk into a bar and you look at the system that's in the bar, and so often that knob is all turned in weird ways. And people aren't really sure exactly, what does that thing do? What am I supposed to be doing with it? This is how it works. Let's maybe get a close-up of the console again here and talk through this. So if we said that the bottom knob is the low frequency and the top knob is the high frequency, that is going to be adjusting the high and low, as Matthew already said. It's going to be adjusting that all together. But those are on set frequencies. Those set frequencies are going to be set by the manufacturer as to what they are. This mid frequency is a little bit different. Now, on the older console I've got to my right, that mid frequency is set, the same as the high and the low. But on this console, you have the ability to adjust what frequency you're actually adjusting. So this kind of black knob here, when I turn that, I'm actually picking which frequency I'm going to adjust the volume at. And that is, in this one, anywhere between 120 hertz up to 4,000 hertz, or 4K. So I can adjust that, and then I can adjust the volume. I hope that's easy enough to see, but I can adjust this and this. So those two go together. They're not independent things. We have lots of people who say, I just turn that thing and I don't know what it does, and I just kind of leave it wherever. That's not really how it works. It is a piece, and those two pieces go together. It's an important thing. When you get into larger consoles, then you have the ability to actually have more mid-frequency adjustment And in most of the digital consoles we were working with today, the high and the low frequencies can also be adjusted. So you can pick and choose how any of those frequencies are adjusted. There are a couple of things that we need to make sure we talk about when we're looking at EQ, though, because I want to make sure that we're not just skipping past this too quickly. First of all, we have already said, both Matthew and I have referred to these as volume controls. They are frequency selectable or frequency specific in the case of the low and high. They're frequency specific volume controls. If you turn that to the left, you are increasing the volume of that input. You're increasing the volume in the low frequency or the high frequency. If you turn it down, you're doing the same thing. You're decreasing the volume in the low frequency or high frequency. Same thing for the mid channels, okay? You are making adjustments for each of those at a volume level, okay? Keep that in mind, because sometimes people think that adjusting for feedback is all done with the master. But no, you may be turning something up and getting yourself into a spot because you've turned up your EQ too much, and that's a problem. That's the second thing I wanted to mention, and that is that if you talk to a professional audio engineer who is out doing live events all the time, you'll find that most of the time they spend cutting out problem frequencies, turning the knob to the right rather than turning it to the left. If you feel like you are missing something in an input, if you're not getting enough high frequency, if you're not getting maybe the sibilance or the good tone that you're looking for with something, maybe you need to start with that input. Are you using the right mic? Are you using the microphone in the right place? Is there something else about that input that needs to change? Is the microphone too close, too far? And there's a number of things to consider. But if you're boosting any frequencies, you're adding something that's not necessarily there. There are lots of times when you might say, I need a little bit more low frequency. Maybe you should be cutting the high frequency rather than adding the low frequency. So just some things to be considering. Nobody ever gets themselves into trouble by cutting some frequencies. They get themselves into trouble by adding in something that isn't already there. Okay, there we go. That's my big, long speech. You're up for the next one.
Well put.
All right.
Yeah, so the next one we're going to go on to,
it's actually the last piece of the EQ.
The last piece of the EQ. It's a little button that's the HPF. It's a high-pass filter. Now, not all mixers do have these. Typically, most of them do nowadays.
Yes.
But even when we go back to this little one here, this one's just got a low-cut knob rather than a high-pass filter or something like that. And so the high-pass filter is saying you have to be this tall or you have to be this high to pass. So only higher frequencies are able to get through to that main output of the sound.
It is an interesting terminology because it is a high pass, but really what it's doing is it's cutting out the low frequency.
Yeah.
And some consoles or some pieces, like you mentioned with this radio box, call it a low cut. Some consoles do that too, but it is interesting because most consoles are labeled high pass, and at the end of the day, it's really cutting the low frequency.
Yep. Low cut, high pass, same kind of thing, different names. It's like what Carl said. These are all the same machine when it comes down to it, or serving the same purpose, and these are things that won't change next year, the year after, 10 years from now. It's all the same kind of system. So that brings us to the next knob above that, which we've got gain.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk about gain?
Oh, you can talk about gain, sure.
All right. So gain is really interesting, and it's one thing where a lot of people can go wrong easily. We're talking about volume in this situation. So gain is adjusting the noise level of an instrument or a microphone and making it kind of higher, but right at the input, and it's boosting that. So it's not controlled, really. You're taking that signal and making it a lot louder, and usually you're sacrificing quality when you do that.
Right. The other thing to keep in mind is that usually you're going to adjust gain first, right? Mm-hmm. So normally, as much as we jumped down to the bottom on purpose, normally what you're going to do is you're going to plug in your input, and then you're going to adjust the gain to get a good level. because the goal of that gain is to kind of, I have to be careful how I say this. I want to use the word equalize, but that can be confusing on a mixer, so we're not gonna say that. Instead, what I'm gonna say is that it's going to give you the ability to kind of normalize and say, this input, this input, they're all gonna come in at different volumes. I can adjust them here so that when I have my faders all across at the same spot, I know that that level is approximately the same. So if we said that, you know, Sally was very quiet, I might have to turn up that knob. Where you said Johnny, John is a little bit louder, I can turn that one down. Principal Smith, he's somewhere in between, I can put that in there. Keeping in mind exactly what you said, Matthew, that the more we turn up this gain, the more potential we have to enter it to have more noise come into the system.
Absolutely. It's
So we
almost
gotta be careful.
thinking about sensitivity,
Yes.
how sensitive that microphone's going to pick up other sounds. So the more gain you add, you can start to pick up things like the room, the crowd, when you just want it to come from one source. Now, it's very interesting what Carl said, how we want to regulate that sound and normalize it, because if we have something like a microphone or an instrument, they're different levels, they're different types of signals. So those are something we really want to start that gain structure with.
Right. Okay, so we're getting close to the end.
Yeah.
We just need to talk about, I think, one last thing, and that is, how are you getting out of this thing, right? If you take a look at the mixers that we have here, the mixers we have here today all have one thing in common, and that is that they have XLR balanced outputs on them. So the 3-pin connector that looks like a microphone cable, and that's coming out of each of these. And that's it. For the kind of work we do, that's a must. You need to have a balanced output so that you've got a good level coming out. Now, yes, we do actually have some RCA outputs on this one, and this one there's some more 1/4-inch outputs and that kind of thing. That's good if you're maybe going to a local recorder. Maybe you're going to some other sort of a device. But if you're going out to an amplifier or to a powered speaker, then coming out of the XLR balanced output is going to be super important. That is going to be your cleanest way of getting out, and it's going to serve you best if you're going a distance. Next month at Resource Stage Study Hall, we're going to be talking about portable audio systems and what the advantages are and that sort of thing, because we know there's lots of schools that need to have a portable system for going out to do track and field day or something like that.
Yeah, we want to talk about how we can get everything that's in these systems and put it into one unit. You can throw it on your backpack and head out to the football field and have a great time at the game.
Right, absolutely. And you know, little mixers like this are great for that because it has XLR outputs and you can go to powered speakers. Little mixers like this are great for that because same sort of thing. You can go inputs into here, a couple of microphones, XLR out. That is to much better. So many times we run into situations where somebody is saying, I've got this and I'm going to adapters out of the 1/4-inch outputs and then or to the RCA outputs to this and that, and my system's really noisy. If you're using good cables and you're using balanced cables out to your amplifier or to your powered speakers, you're starting off on the right foot. I'm not going to guarantee it's going to work 100% of the time because, you know, there's all kinds of questions, and sometimes that cable that's been sitting in the bottom of the Rubbermaid tub at the school for the last 10 years is not in great shape. There's a reason it's at the bottom. But it's the right place to start every single time.
Absolutely. Well said. Well, like Carl said, we'll be talking about that next month. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, and we're happy to see you guys again.
All right. Thank you very much.